Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome everyone here tonight to SNUI, to a very special presentation by Minister Suzanne Gibson Foy. And the talk this evening will be called Spiritual Pathways, Part 2. Now, Minister Suzanne Gibson Foy is a tutor at the Arthur Findlay College, as well as being a minister of the Spiritualist National Union. Before we go any further, can I please just ask that you remain on mute throughout the talk this evening, unless Suzanne invites you to come into the room at the end for questions. Also, can I please advise you that this service is being recorded, so if you do not wish your face to be seen on the screen, please switch off your cameras. Now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Minister Suzanne Gibson Foy.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and good evening, everybody. I hope you are all well on this January cold night. It's a pleasure to speak to you once more. And my plan this evening is to talk to you for about 40 minutes or so. So if you can remain seated during that time, and then we'll open the floor to questions after them. We've just got a few more people dashing in at the last minute, just like being in a service, isn't it, where the last ones flood in. Well, this talk is a part 2. So I am going to spend just a couple of minutes recapping part 1. Part 1 I delivered last summer, and since then a lot has happened to all of us, I think. And I don't know about you, but my love and knowledge of the spirit world has been an important part of helping me get through these last 8 months or so, and I'm sure that you will have experienced the same. And so the title is Mediumship and the Spiritual Pathway. I am focusing on the development and unfoldment of mediumship, and I'll tell you why I'm doing that. So last summer I delivered part 1, and what I was really wanting to emphasize during that is that mediumship is a spiritual pathway. Now let me just get my PowerPoint up for you. I've spent ages preparing it and then I almost forgot to put it up there. I will be moving in and out of this. So I do very much believe that mediumship has the potential to be a spiritual journey. It isn't for everyone, but I do believe that there is a plan, a divine plan, which is enacted by helpers in the spirit world for each of us to undergo a spiritual journey of unfoldment and progression. And mediumship, our unfoldment of our mediumship, can very much be a part of that. So last year I was looking at systems in terms of psychotherapy and also religious systems in trying to show the parallels of how we unfold our mediumship and how that can be about our spiritual growth and our spiritual development. Not only did I emphasize that there is a pathway, I also believe pretty much it's a set pathway. When we sit down and we compare our experiences, we have an awful lot in common with us, with each other. And therefore we can start to see that the unfoldment of our mediumship and the unfoldment of our own spirituality is not random. It is not by chance. It is something that is chosen. It is something, if you like, that is perhaps given to us. And if we accept, we receive it and we walk upon it. And it has set markers. It is almost a set route which we follow. And so there is something within us that psychotherapists, Jungian psychotherapists would recognize, that we have an innate need to grow. We have an innate need to get closer to that which we know as God. There is an individuation process. That's what some psychotherapists would believe, those who follow the Jungian line. And also in religious systems, it's very much recognized that it is natural for us to move towards God. And there is this idea that not only is it natural for us to move towards God, but that God invites us, God beckons, and we follow. So there is this part of us that needs to progress, it needs to grow, it needs to get better, it needs to get closer to the divine. And what I'm going to look at today are some of the common ailments that occur along the journey of our spiritual development, our spiritual progression. And because we're talking about mediumship, we'll be looking at some of the ones that crop up as we unfold our mediumship. And so it is perfectly natural for us on our spiritual journey, which I'm putting in parallel with our mediumship journey, the unfoldment of our mediumship. It is perfectly normal for us to move between states of being. And I have stolen this from Ignatius of Loyola, who calls it movements of the heart. And for those of you who did watch part 1, you'll be very aware that I do like looking at psychotherapy as part of my background, and I like looking at religious systems and drawing the parallels. So Ignatius of Loyola, I'm sure lots of you have heard of him, is from the first half of 16th century Spain. So he's writing in the early 1500s. And he was a lesser nobleman who was a soldier. And then he has his moment where he awakens. It isn't a moment, it takes him several months, but he awakens and then he goes on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and he becomes a priest and he founds a movement. But his words from 500 years ago are so helpful to us. And for me, as we struggle forward to unfold ourselves, to unfold our mediumship, I find it so helpful to look back to people who are writing in the 1200s, the 1300s, the 1500s, because they've all been there before and they give us hints and clues of how to cope. And so Ignatius calls this movements of the heart. We move, we alternate between these states of joy and fear, of peace and anxiety, of hope and discouragement. And I'm sure whatever mediumship you carry out, or even if you're not unfolding your mediumship, but you're just very interested in the unfoldment of your spirituality, I'm sure you're very familiar with these different states that we can move into. And I think sometimes we can be in all of these states in one day, probably many times over. But it's a recognition that us moving through lots of different emotions is very, very normal. And when we are unfolding our mediumship, I think this becomes even heightened. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. So from Ignatius, and I'm going to use him a bit later on to help us, we have movements of the heart. So moving between all of these different states. The joy when you connect to the spirit world and you get something right. The fear before you actually go to make that link. And so another person whose work I find really helpful is Teresa of Avila. And she talks about all the horrible stuff that goes on in our psychology. She calls it reptiles and venomous creatures. And some of these reptiles, I'm sure that you will recognize. When we feel small within ourselves, we have a tendency to start to fall into some of these behaviors. We can become very critical of ourselves, and we can become very critical of others. And those two things go hand in hand. If you criticize yourself and you're hard on yourself, you're probably pretty hard on others as well. And remember that we can adapt this to our mediumship, but it also is important in other areas of our lives as well. So we can be very jealous or envious. When we feel small, we are automatically very defensive. When it comes to looking at our mediumship, this can be a big problem. We can become very arrogant. Arrogant is actually another form of defense, really, trying to protect or hold on to a view of ourselves. We can become dishonest. We can be dishonest within our mediumship. That's an interesting one. And we can feel hopeless. And so all of those emotions and behaviors, and obviously there are many more, again, they're normal. They are nothing to be ashamed about. They are absolutely normal. But when we come to unfold our mediumship, they're things that get in the way. And so what we want to look at is how we can recognize these things within ourselves and how we can move beyond them. And so in my lecture last year, I emphasized that we need to get some sort of understanding about what is it that is motivating our mediumship, or what is it that's motivating the unfoldment of our mediumship. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about healing or trance or platform mediumship. We need to have a sense of what's the motivating force behind it. And I mention this because as we go through our journey, it really becomes our anchor point. It's the one thing that is going to carry us through all of the challenges and all of the difficulties that we face on our journey. And so when I looked at this last time, and it doesn't hurt to just touch on it again, because I think it's really important, there is a part of you that is pushing you forward. There is a part of you that wants to grow, it wants to progress, and it wants to do this mediumship. And it's not coming from the very human side of you, it's coming from your spirit. Now, hand in hand with that, the spirit world are there, encouraging you and beckoning you to take those steps. And it's almost a what comes first? It's a chicken and an egg scenario. Was it your spirit wanting to move forward and the spirit world respond? Or was it that the spirit world turned up and they start to work with your energy? And you becoming aware of that, respond and want to follow. And I can't say which way around it is. I know when the spirit world first entered my life, and I use that word very carefully, in that when I first became aware that something was happening, I certainly wasn't seeking it, and something just started to spontaneously happen. When it did, I was lucky that I knew what it was. But we need to see our unfoldment as a partnership. And it is our spirit part pushing us forward, and it is the spirit world helping us to do that. Now, the reason that this anchor point becomes so important is because if your anchor point is, well, I need to earn money, or I like having power, or I like being able to impress people, then that is not really coming from the spirit. That's going to be coming from the very human part of us. And if that's the case, if that's the motivation, that will get us a certain distance. There's no doubt about that. It will get us a certain distance, but it won't be enduring. It won't be long lasting. It won't be enough to help you through the hurdles and obstacles that are going to come up. Whereas if you have a sense that I'm not really sure why I'm doing this, I just know that I have to, then you know it's coming from inside, it's coming from the spirit. And that sense of I just have to do this is something that is going to help you and encourage you and nourish you, because you start to see that the motivation is coming from beyond the human self. It's coming from your spirit. And remember that your spirit has come here for a reason. It's come here to learn. It's come here to grow. And so let's start to have a look in a bit more detail of some of the more common things that come up for us as we are unfolding our mediumship. Now, if someone had told me all of this stuff 25 years ago, it'd be fabulous, because we get into habits very quickly with our mediumship. So in presenting this to you, I am hoping that it will help you on your journey. It won't take away all of the difficulty, it won't take away all of the pain, but perhaps it will help you start to put things into context. So one of the first things that people might ask when they start to experience the spirit world is, why me? Why me? And I'm going to break this up into two parts. Why me? I don't deserve this. Why me? And the answer really is, well, why not you? And I suppose it depends whether you see mediumship as being a gift that is given and only very special people have it, or whether you see it as an ability. And I must say, I do use both of those words interchangeably, and I know some people are very careful to separate them out. But in reality, we are all spirit in the here and now. And therefore, in theory, everyone could be a medium. In theory, because we are all spirit. And so when you say, why me? Do I deserve this? Is this something incredibly special? Well, why not you? Because it could be any of us. That's the truth of it. And then it's about what you do with it. So while I do believe that everyone has the possibility of being a medium, I do think that we have different levels of ability. And that's something that we're not going to get to know until we start to unfold our mediumship. But when we're saying, why me? And I must admit, I went through this. My grandmother was a medium. I always thought it was a very, very special thing. And so when it started with myself, I really did think, why on earth have you chosen me? But if you are saying that or questioning that, why me? What can happen here is we're starting to look at our worth and our self-worth. And one of the things that we need to have in order to be able to do many things well in this world is we need to have a sense of self. We need to have self-worth, and we need to be able to value ourselves. And so if you're saying, why me? The answer is very simply, why not you, because everybody, to a point, is capable of doing it. Because what can happen is you can start to have experiences and you will just dismiss them. You will say, oh, well, that can't have been anything mediumistic. It will have just been my imagination. I will have just made that up. And when you start to go down that route of dismissing what is happening to you, then further down the road, you're setting yourself up into a habit of second guessing and not actually trusting what you're getting. So the why me can lead to the dismissing of experiences. And mediumship is all about experiences. It's about allowing yourself to experience the spirit world. And to begin with, it does feel a bit like you're making it up. It can feel like your imagination. But the important thing is that you trust that it isn't. And this is where trust comes in. You know, why me? Well, I'm a spirit. And there is a spirit world out there that wants to use me for communication. It is as simple as that. And so we start to move from dismissing and disbelieving more into accepting and trusting. Now, the other thing that I'm going to put in at this stage, which is a little bit similar, it's for those people, and can I just say I fall into probably all of these categories lots of times. So for these people who then consider themselves to be very rational, very analytical, and very logical, they're getting stuck here as well because they don't believe. And so there is this sense of, well, I've got this piece of information, but it's so obvious. I must have thought it through, you know, or it's logical. I must have just got there by deduction. And so people can put their own brain power above the spirit world in that sense. And this is, again, another thing that we need to try to move out of. The analytical mind will be really useful for your mediumship, no doubt about that. But one of the pitfalls at the beginning is that you simply don't believe what you're getting because you think it's coming from your own intellect rather than from the spirit world. So we have to try and distinguish between the intellect and experience. Okay, mediumship is about experience. Do not dismiss your experiences. The more you can learn to trust them, the better. Now, one of the ways that you might realize you're a bit stuck in this state is if you find yourself testing the spirit world. You might have experienced something, you might have heard something or seen something, and you say, oh, I wasn't sure, do it again, just to make sure. Or you might find yourself saying, I'll only believe if you do X, Y, and Z. And so you're set up a little bit of a game with the spirit world where they have to keep proving to you that they exist. And of course, at the beginning, we can't be gullible. We have to have an amount of questioning, an amount of testing. But there comes a time when we need to put it down. Otherwise, when we come to do our mediumship, we come with this attitude of disbelief, mistrust. And so it's about recognizing we know that we're constantly told that we need to trust. And so it's about really starting to be aware of what goes on in our own psychology so that we can move into a position of trusting, put down the habit of disbelieving, put down the habit of testing, and move into a place where we can accept and we can trust. Now, if you do have issues with self-worth, which most of us do, to be fair, one way or another, if you have that, then you are going to fall into the I'm not good enough category. So you'll be saying, why me, Spirit World? Why have you chosen me? I am not good enough. Now, this is such a common thing with students and very common with myself. This idea of not being good enough means that you end up judging your work all of the time. And not only do you analyze it and judge it, you end up dissecting it and annihilating it and destroying it. And so what will then happen is, as you go into your next contact or your next link or your next class, you might start off by just saying, oh, this isn't going to work. I haven't got a good feeling. This isn't going to work. And the moment you do that, of course, you're setting up that it won't work, because your mental and emotional state is so important. Your psychology is so important that if you're starting with that point of, I don't think this is going to work, imagine what your energy is like. You know, we talked last time about building your energy and sitting in the power. Your energy is a reflection of what's going on for you psychologically. And imagine if your starting point is, oh, this isn't going to work. You know, your energy is going to be tiny. So again, this can become such a terrible habit. So we're looking at habits that we need to break. So yes, we do need to analyze our work. And then we put it down. It's as simple as that. We look at what worked, we look at what didn't work, and then we have to move on. Because that brings us into the next one, which is the fear of failure. And so if you have the idea of not being good enough, if you believe that you're not good enough, you're going to constantly look for evidence that you're not good enough. And when there is evidence that you do contacts that work, you will hold that in your mind for about 30 seconds, and you'll do one that doesn't work, and you'll hold that in your mind for days and months, weeks. And so we tend to gear ourselves to proving ourselves right. So if you don't think you're good enough, you're going to have a terrible fear of failure. So what do we do with this? So this is something that will crop up once you're starting to do practices and you're starting to work a little bit and your gifts of the Spirit are unfolding. You start to fear losing what you've got. And so how to recognize if you're in this phase? Well, when you're afraid of failure, what you tend to do is create a safe space for yourself. And so you work within your comfort zone. And so when you find yourself saying, well, I work in this way and not that way, you find yourself saying, I don't want to do that exercise, it's not going to be very good for me. You're playing safe. And you've gained a certain amount of security in how you work, and you're now scared to test it, and you're scared you might lose something. And so this is where we start to play safe. And this is where, you know, if you watch somebody work and they've been working exactly the same way for 20, 30 years, you know, this is where they are. They've developed something, it works for them, and they don't want to go any further. because it's too risky, because to go further, our mediumship is going to change. And so this is an interesting place to be, because I'm sure most of us have been there at one time or another. And I'm not sure it's something that we ever completely move out of, but it's just recognizing that it's there. And what happens when we're in this state is that we have a view of ourselves. We have a view of ourselves, of what we do. We have a view of how we work. We might even have a view of what our standard is. And we don't want to change it. We don't want to hear any criticism of it. We don't want to hear any feedback. We don't want to try anything new because it's too risky. And so fear of failure is actually about trying to be safe. It's about trying to be secure, and it's about being in a comfort zone. And so if you find yourself becoming, and we are sensitive, you know, as our mediumship develops, the unfortunate thing is that we do become more and more sensitive. We do. But if we find ourselves really finding it very hard to take any feedback or criticism because it's mortifying, it upsets us so much, then we need to have a look at ourselves. And, you know, the way out of this is about recognizing that nothing is safe, nothing is secure. Life is very much about ups and downs, ebbs and flows. It is not about a constancy. It's actually about change. And our mediumship, if we want it to grow, it will keep changing. There are phases, natural phases of development that we go through. And if we want to fully embrace our potential, then we have to allow ourselves to take risks, and we have to allow ourselves to change, because our mediumship will change. As we change, our mediumship changes. And really, that's what we want to be doing. And so, you know, the context of this is to be thinking. I say thinking. We want to go beyond that. We want to be knowing, we want to be experiencing ourselves as this spirit, eternal being that is on a journey, and our mediumship is part of that. Our mediumship is part of our journey, and therefore it will move, it will shift, it will change, it will come, it will go. Our clairs will change, the way that we work will change. That's, in a way, how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be about change. It's not supposed to be something that is fixed. And so that brings me on to the next one, which is where we start to face all the shoulds. All the shoulds. When in your life you come across a list of shoulds going on in your head, this is where you have your own rule book that you have written. Nobody else has got your rule book, only you've got it. And you get very upset when your rules get broken. So this is a nice one. It shouldn't be this way. So we have a need for approval. We have a need for validation. And when we hit difficult times in our mediumship, in specific readings, in specific demonstrations, we might have this going through our head that it shouldn't be like this. And the answer really is, why shouldn't it be like this? What are you setting up? What are you expecting? There is always something bigger happening. So as we go forward with our mediumship, there's an expectation in a way that it's all just going to get easier and easier and things are going to come together. And to a degree they do, but that's not always the case. So if you find yourself saying, it's not fair that this happened, it's not reasonable that this happened, then you have a little unwritten rule that nobody else knows. And particularly with mediumship, this is an interesting one, because you might do a sitting or a demonstration and you might think, gosh, that was such hard work. It shouldn't be such hard work. And I had a friend once who was doing lots of awards with the SNU. She was a good medium. She was a good medium, and she was going through her awards, and she failed one of them. And she said she did something and it just didn't work. And the outcome was that she felt that if she was supposed to have this award, it would have all worked. It would have all gone her way. Spirit would have been on her side. It would have worked. It would have all gone her way, and she would have passed. But because she didn't, she took it that this wasn't right for her. The spirit world didn't want her to do this. And she walked away. And she didn't just walk away from the SNU, she walked away from mediumship, full stop, having put many years into her work. And it's a big lesson for me, really. If it's tough, then you need to do something different. If it's tough, there's something to be learnt. Because it isn't always going to be easy. It isn't always going to be plain sailing. You've come here to learn. You've come here to experience. You've come here to grow. And we're very aware that we don't grow when everything is hunky-dory and peaceful and well. We don't grow in those circumstances. We know that we grow when things are a bit difficult for us. So it is about starting to recognize that there are going to be challenges, there are going to be difficulties, and it's about how you tackle it. And that's why I said near the beginning that the anchor point becomes so important. Why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through all this difficulty? Because I have to, because my spirit wants me to do this, because there is a plan. I don't know what the plan is, but I know I'm following some sort of plan. That anchor point becomes your encouragement, it becomes your nourishment, it becomes your cheerleader. Also, I want to emphasize that when we're analysing our mediumship and we might be looking at what's gone wrong and why this didn't happen and why that didn't happen, we also have to recognise the sense of a bigger picture, a bigger plan. And, we often, when we're doing sittings, sometimes the sitter wants a specific person to come through. And if that one person doesn't come through, the sitting can be judged on their part as a failure. But there are reasons, perhaps, why that one person hasn't come through. It might be that the sitter actually, although they think they're ready to hear from them, they're not. It might be that other people have come through because they've got things that they need to say and they are more helpful at that moment in time in that person's life. So there are other things happening that sometimes are beyond our control, and we don't always get the answers. Sometimes we're told in sittings or we're told in mediumship that the best evidence is where the person has to go and find out afterwards. They have to go and do a bit of research. and then they find out it's true. The medium never gets to hear that. The medium only ever gets the lists of no's. They don't get the validation that they're looking for. In the end, they have to learn to live without it. And I think that's one of the hardest things with mediumship, is sometimes we don't get the answer, sometimes we don't know, and we have to learn to be able to live with that. That doesn't mean we blame everybody else for what's gone wrong. We always have to look to ourselves to see if we've created the right conditions. And if we have, then we have to accept that perhaps there's something else going on that we don't know about. And so let's look at some of the ways in which we can help ourselves. And so this slide is divided into two halves, really. The top half, we've got the stuff from Ignatius of Loyola, movements of the heart. And he calls that when we're in a bad place, whatever that bad place is, of not feeling encouraged, of feeling hopeless, of not feeling loved, of feeling it's all a failure and it's all a disaster, he calls that spiritual desolation. And when we're in a good place and we feel joyous and the spirit world are on our side and all is going well, he calls that spiritual consolation. And we move between the two. But trying to lessen the dissolution so that we can, or the desolation, I should say, so that we can lessen that, there are things that we can do. And he says, very simply, well, be aware of what's going on to begin with. Understand why it's happening, what is happening, why it's happening, and then do something to change it. So most of our fears, lack of self-worth, fear of failure, not good enough, most of that comes from our background. It comes from our childhood position generally. And mediumship is a wonderful place for it to be activated and triggered and for it to play out. But it will come from way back. And so below, I've put there some of the needs, 3 needs that come out of, they're adapted from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I've just chosen the 3 that are the most common. That as we go through life, we look for connection with other people, we look to feel safe and secure, and we look for other people's approval. And what we tend to spend our time doing is we do things to avoid being rejected, to avoid feeling insecure, and to avoid facing disapproval. And we have defenses come in that help us. And so the way out of this feeling of rejection, it's actually, on the one hand, massive, and on the other hand, perhaps very difficult to do. We seek connection with other people, and as we know, other people are not always, they don't always stay the course. They come and they go. The one aspect of our life that doesn't come and go is one of it is us. The other is the power of God and the divine. And so when we move into a position of humility, we recognize that greater power. That's what being humble is about. It's about recognizing there is a greater power than us. There is the power of God. And that power, that love is constant and it never rejects. And I'm sure when you sit in the power, you touch that love. You touch that greatness of God. And when you touch that place, you are fully connected. and you cannot be rejected. And so, as my work unfolds, and I must say that even obviously with all the churches closed, I miss demonstrating terribly. And over the last few weeks, over Christmas, I took a couple of weeks off, and I've really missed doing sittings because I've missed being in that power. I've missed being in that loving energy. And I think it's really important that we don't dismiss messages as just being messages. They're far more than that. Both the medium and often the sitter experience the power of the Spirit in a sitting. And so I'm starting to look at the action of mediumship as almost being in prayer. Now, I'm not praying to God when I'm doing a sitting or a contact, but I'm in the power of the divine, and something very special happens in that place. And so this need for us to get connection, well, when we feel connected to the great power of God, the great Spirit, we've got it, and it's there. We can't lose it. We can't be rejected. It becomes a huge stabilizing force in our lives. The second one, this sense of feeling insecure, wanting to be safe. We have to accept that we're not safe, and our mediumship certainly doesn't give us safety. Our mediumship is us really, riding the waves. It actually requires a huge amount of courage to do mediumship, because there is an amount of uncertainty with it. And we don't always get the reaction and the validation that we're looking for. We have to accept that. And finally, we have to take agency or responsibility for our actions. Within our mediumship, we do what we can to get ourselves in the right frame of mind, to create the right conditions, to be able to link to the power of Spirit. We do what we can to make it work. So we take an amount of control. We can't take full control, but we can take an amount. Okay, we become the agents of our own work. And so just before I open to questions, I just found this quote yesterday, and I thought it was rather nice because it shows the connection that we have with other religious systems. And Matthew the Poor died just after this in 2006, and he was an Orthodox monk. And he says, when the soul ascends to the world of true light, which is within its own self, it begins to feel in harmony with God through constant prayer. We then lose all dichotomy as well as doubt and anxiety, when truth pervades all its feeling and movements, its past and present experiences melted in the fire of the divine love. We're all on the same journey, and our work as a medium enables us to also have our own journey. Not everybody takes it, not everybody wants to embrace that side of it, but it is there to be had, and I very much believe that it is part of the great plan that each of us has the opportunity to spiritually progress. It's our seventh principle, and mediumship very, very much offers a route to do that. So I hope you enjoyed my talk. We've just got 10 minutes or so if there are any questions from the floor. Now I can't see you all, so let's have a look. So if anyone has any questions, you can raise your little blue hand. Now, have we got Lorna coming in there?
The blue hand is now in the bottom bar of the screen, so if you have any questions we'd like to ask, please raise your hand. No one so far.
So when I undertook my unfoldment of mediumship, and I say it as if it's in the past, and it isn't, it's very present. I find every day that I'm doing mediumship, I am still learning, I am still unfolding. And I think our psychological
Caroline's waving
is crucial. Okay, so we have got Linda. Do you want to unmute yourself, Linda?
Trying to find gallery view.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I saw Carolyn was raising her hand for a question. So I apologize. I think Carolyn had a question though.
Okay, I can't see anybody. So Caroline, where are you? Have you got a question?
Yeah, she's waving her hand.
I can't see the blue bar at the bottom. Linda, go ahead and I'll come in after you.
I think Linda was just directing you, Caroline.
All right. Okay. Suzanne, I love the way you work. I've sent you an email before, but I mean, I heard you in the summer, and I just think the way that you work is amazing. For me, certainly, it's been a spiritual thing. I call myself the reluctant medium because that was the very last thing I wanted to do. And basically, I feel, I mean, eventually I've cooperated, but for a long time I was pushed. And but the beauty for me about mediumship, and it's not a word I happen to like, is I do feel that I have grown spiritually. And that for me has been the blessing. I mean, I had to go to an Orthodox school. I was, brought up in the Church of England and in the Church of Scotland. And in truth, I was put off and went and walked away. But I feel that since my connection with spirit and learning at the Arthur Finney College, that I have been enriched by spirit. And I'm a lot more content with myself. I like myself better for having been working with spirit. I still go into the state of not knowing, and is it me or is it them, etc., etc. But I'm learning that, when it's me and when it's them. So thank you so much for talking about this tonight, because I think that's what spiritualism is missing, is the spirituality of spiritualism. And I am so encouraged to hear you talk this way, because I think that's what our movement needs, is more communion with spirit and less on the performance, but more on the true meaning of spirit. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carolyn. And I do see really the work of the medium, I see as really the work of the mystic. And therefore, mediumship is a spiritual experience. And each time, if we allow ourselves, if we're willing, each time we touch the spirit world and we take part in giving a communication, we are in communion, and therefore we are touched by the presence, and we are slowly being transformed. And you know, that's the wonderful thing about being able to experience the spirit. We know that we're energy, and when the spirit world draw close to us, our energy responds, our spirit responds, and therefore, even though we don't realize it, a change is taking place. And I'm going to say if we allow it, but that's not necessarily the case. We might not be conscious of it, but a change is taking place. And for me, I completely agree with you, Carolyn. I think most people are reluctant mediums. There aren't many that go in, who get very far, who are desperately wanting to do this. We are generally reluctant. And therefore, we have to recognize that we're being pushed or beckoned or called, and we're working in conjunction with the spirit world for our own growth. And we know that as each of us grows, we know that we help each other and we help the spirit world en masse. Thank you. Are there any other questions? We've got Cheryl.
Cheryl, just asking her to mute.
Hello there, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
I might have a question that's for a very, very new beginner, I suppose, and it's one that I've been struggling to find the answer to, and it's about sitting in the power and trying to understand what that concept really means, to sit in the power, and how to go about trying to learn to do that.
Okay, so there are, off the top of my head, there are various who have done that, so you could have a look at some of those. But sitting in the power is about, you're sitting in your power. So sitting in the power is about becoming aware of your own energy, your own spirit energy, and being able to both expand it and kind of give it depth and give it movement. Because when we blend with the spirit world, they are just energy. And so we blend our energy with theirs. So we have to change our energy in order to be able to blend with them, in order to be able to meet with them. So sitting in the power is, I can't really run through exactly how to do it, it would take too long, but it is about learning to expand your energy, being able to hold the power. So we start to sit, and we might just sit for 15 minutes or so, and then we build up to being able to sit for an hour and a half. Because we're going to work with the spirit world, our energy needs to be up to the job. So we're building up our own power, our own energy, spirit world. I hope that helps, Cheryl. The best thing to do is to have, most courses at college would start with a meditation, which is really sitting in the power.
Oh, right, okay. That's good to know.
So some of the online courses will be doing that. And there'll be courses on SNUI. I'm sure there'll be classes on sitting in the power. It's the fundamental of our work.
Yes. But that's lovely, Suzanne. Thank you. I'll take a look at the courses and see what's available.
Okay, but have a look on SNUI as well.
I will do. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay,
We now have Sharon Ford. Would you like to come into the room, please?
Hi there. You keep referencing, contacting the spirit world per se. I'm of the opinion that we are in the spirit world as opposed to it being a separate entity. Mm-hmm. This is where the confusion lies, because everyone thinks that, it's in a different place when we are, I call spiritual beings having the human experience. So every experience that we have is technically spiritual, whether we are mediums or not. It's the soul's experience of being as part and parcel of the universe per se. So it's a case of, as you say, everyone's can contact the spirit world on whatever level. And we do constantly contact the spiritual world, whether we are mediums or not, surely.
Well, I think as mediums, we're training ourselves to be able to do a very specific job. So other people will, yes, they might be inspired by the spirit, whether they are aware of that inspiration, whether they're aware of where it's coming from, I suppose is a bit different. Whereas we are trying to make ourselves very aware of the spirit world and to be able to bring messages from specific people rather than having random experiences.
But scientists also have random experiences, because obviously it's all about sort of inspiration. So obviously, you know, you will have your writers, your poets, whatever, being influenced by the spirit world without being aware of it, because of the ideas they sort of may come, you know, forward, you know, medicine and all sorts of different types of, you know, inspiration that we get. So they're not necessarily mediums in their own right, but they have been inspired by those in the world of spirit.
Absolutely. Whether they recognize that they've been inspired,
exactly,
is a different matter. Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree.
Okay, that's all right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And is there anyone else want to ask any questions? Or is that us for the evening? I think that's us for the evening.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you've got something from that, and thank you for coming.
And thank you very much, Minister Suzanne Gibson Foy, for a wonderful evening. And thank you for your time and knowledge that you've shared with us all in the SNUI tonight. Thank you.
Pleasure.